Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Insights at DDLynn Designs, a unique twist in the ancient art of wire. I know it's been a spell, life happens, but I'm really excited to teach you all today. It's kind of an intermediate tutorial. I'm not sure beginners can pull this off. My hat off to you if you do. I call this the bow tie wrap because it looks like a bow. And I've used an amethyst cabochon in this, and it is a flat back cabochon. And you can use any stone that you want. But before we get started, please, if you would, don't forget to comment, like, and hit that bell down below. I'm going to start doing tutorials once a week again. So if you like my tutorials, I'd really appreciate your feedback. Share it with other wire artists. And hit the subscribe button so that you know when my new tutorials are coming out. So that being said, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about the wire. Depending on the size of the piece that you're making will determine how much wire you need. So you need to compensate for that. I'm using extra wire today just so that you don't run out if you're starting off with this design and you're not sure what to use. So the cabochon that I'm using is a labradorite, and it looks about 19 by 8 millimeters at its widest point, 9 millimeters at its widest point. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut 12 inches of 16 gauge wire. You can use 18 gauge and you can use square. I'm using round. And I also have 2 pieces of 8 inches of 21 gauge square. You can use 20 gauge, but I'm using a lighter gauge because it'll be encompassed inside of this frame. So the first thing that we're going to do is get our half round wire. You can use 22 and a half, 20, whatever you want to use. I wouldn't use an 18 gauge half round. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut myself about, no, I don't need very much. I'm going to say about, 4, let's measure it. Looks like about 4 inches of 22 and a half round wire. So I'm going to wrap my cabochon first, and everything in wire art, it's an ancient art. If you don't know, it dates back 5,000 years before the Phoenicians. It's amazing what they did with very little tools. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the base that's going to wrap around my stone. So I'm going to wrap this 2 wires with my 22 gauge half round. And based on the width of my stone, I'm thinking about, I don't know, 5, 6 wraps. So I'm just going to wrap these. Check the bottom before I continue. I'm going to slide them together, and I'm going to find my middle here. So let's get my handy dandy measuring tape out. I've got 8 inches of wire here, and I want the center. So I'm going to move that up a little bit. That's why I haven't tightened my wire down. So a little tip, if you're a beginner and you're just starting off with half round wire is flat on the back, and it is domed or arched or curved on the top. It's kind of hard to see because this is a very tiny half round. So I'm going to go ahead and get my stone, and I'm just going to look at the base here, and I think I want just 2 more wraps. So let's go ahead and do 2 more wraps, 1 and 2. And we're going to cut our wire on the same side. So you always want to cut your tails on the same side. And I never leave my wire all the way across my base wires. These are called your base wires or core wires. I'm going to cut back away from that because I don't want it to unravel. And if you can see here, I've left it back probably just over the first wire. And then I'm just going to crimp it down. Now 22 and a half round wire is very soft, so you don't want to push on it really hard or you'll actually smash your wire. When you're working with a thicker gauge, half round, you can go ahead and put a little more pressure. So I'm just going to go ahead and wrap that down and squeeze these together. I need different pliers. I don't like the way those are working with this. So you can see that it's kind of bubbled, if you will. So all I'm going to do is very gently just press it down and pull it back together. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to wrap our cabochon. So here's a nice tip if you're a beginner again. I do a lot of tips and tricks for beginners. So what I'm going to do, and if you don't have a caliper, I recommend you get one. It will really help you try to figure out how to wrap your stones. As simple as wrapping may seem, I believe in wire, it's the hardest thing to learn to do. And the simple fact is you can't hide anything when you're wrapping versus weaving. So I'm going to measure the base of my stone, and that's going to tell me the width that I need to create the U shape that I'm going to wrap around the bottom of the stone. So here's a really cool tip. If you get yourself, and I might be able to do this with some pliers, if you get yourself some big enough pliers, a dowel, any round object you have in your house, see this is bigger than that. So, and I know that it's bigger than my ring mandrel. So I'm going to grab this handy dandy little tool, and because this is kind of a teardrop shape, that's not the right one. Hold on, I'm looking for it. Here we go. I can get an idea of the kind of width I need to start shaping my wires around my stone. So I'm going to pre-shape my wire, and that's going to help me wrap my stone. So I'm going to come up here, make sure that you've got your tail ends down, facing away from you, and I'm just going to start arching these wires up. And then I'm going to use this wonderful little tool to wrap it around to help me be able to set my stone. So really, that's what we're doing, is we're just giving ourselves a head start. And my little wires have moved, so I'm going to move them down just with my fingernail and get them back in center. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and put my stone in, and see how that helps you, because instead of you holding it down with your wires straight and trying to pull it around your stone, it makes it very hard, and you often will off center your length a little bit, which is fine. That's okay if you have a little bit off, but you don't want to have a whole lot on one side and not the other. So I've got my base, and then I'm just going to squeeze it around. You can do this on your board. I've learned for me that it helps me doing it in the air, believe it or not. And I'm going to remove my tape now, and that's another tip. To support your wires while you're wrapping a cabochon, it's really helpful if you tape your wires when you need to do a wrap, or you're using half round, or you're weaving the bottom or something. It just gives you a lot more control. So I'm going to go ahead and take my tape off, and I'm actually going to retape, but I'm going to come up higher. So I'm going to set my stone again, come over the top, and I don't want a lot of gap on this because I'm going to be closing off this stone like I did here. See how there's very little gap space up there? Oops, drop that. So I'm going to go ahead and come down. Push my wires down a little bit more. I'm using my finger to do that because I really don't want a lot of gap space. And push my stone back in there. Okay, so I've got a pretty good idea of where I want to start. So here's another great tip. A lot of beginners struggle with trying to figure out how to bend their wires evenly. You can use a marker. I pretty much know that I'm going to do this right on my stone. And if you grab both your wires, if you notice they're in an X shape, you use needle nose or flat nose, you can simply and very gently just squeeze them together. And that's going to give you your center, and it's going to give you your perfect crimp that you need. So now what I'm going to do to make my life a lot easier is I'm going to hold where that crimp is, and I'm going to kind of shape the wires away from me. I'm just pulling them or arching them back. Always move your wires in your best working position. So you notice that I pulled back there and I turned my wires around because I'm right dominant. And now I can put my wires together, put my stone back in, and I have the perfect wrap. So I'm going to get my half round again. You know what? I think, yeah, I'll do half round instead of weaving wire. You can do weaving wire as well. So let's get all this clutter out of the way. And let's get that out of the way. So let's get my 22 gauge. This is 22 gauge half round. And again, I'm just going to cut myself about, I won't need a lot on this because I'm only going to do a few wraps. So I'm going to cut myself about 3.5 inches. All right. I want to make sure I'm center here. So let me move this back. I can see it's moving off. It's been a while since I've done a... Now, to make your life easy, this is where I would recommend that you tape. So I'm going to bring my wires together where they're flat on each side, and I'm just simply going to tape them. This just gives me control. So I'm supporting my wires, and they're not, stretching away from me as I'm trying to wrap. These are great tips to help you accelerate your journey in this ancient art. And then I'm just going to simply bend this to give myself some start. And I'm going to bring my two wires together, and I'm holding them very closely with my thumb and my index finger. I'm going to wrap them around here. Let me see how many times I want to do this. I think that should be good. I'm going to do 3 wraps. Then I'm going to come all the way around the back because this is my front. And if you are a beginner, you might always want to mark with a Sharpie your front and back. So I'm just simply pulling that wire through, sliding it up because I'm going to close it off. I don't want it to come unraveled. And I'm going to tuck it in the back. Come down in there as close as I possibly can. Now here's another tip. If you're trying to figure out how to cut your wire when it's in between other wires and you want to get really close and don't have a lot of tail, pull your wire away from you, away from the frame or away from the wire that you want to connect it to. And then just get down there as deep as you can and just snap that off. And you'll need some very fine-nosed needle nose crimping wires. And then I'm going to do the same thing around here. And you know what? I think that will work. So now I'm going to take my tape off. Just thinking out loud, you guys, about how many wraps I want to do. And I'm pretty sure the 3 is sufficient. I'm going to open my wires up. And I'm going to tuck it in. Just making sure it's nice and taut. I noticed I'm very picky. This side was a little loose. And I'm just going to simply tuck my wire in again to close it off. Let's open this up a little bit more. We're going to be opening these up a lot anyways. So don't be afraid to go ahead and open that up. Slide it down. Then I'm going to use my pliers to bring it around, crimp it down, and now I'm going to cut it. Okay, so we've got that. Now I'm just going to very gently crimp. And if your wire's offset a little bit, you know, because they'll want to kind of turn, and this is a softer gauged square wire. If I didn't say that in the beginning, you guys, I'm using square wire to wrap this cabochon. Now I'm going to wrap the cabochon. So we've got a nice tight fit. So that's good. So to make my life easy, I'm going to use my fingernail to pull that wire away and create a gap. You can also use tools. This is one of my favorite tools. It's actually a wood carving tool. And anything super sharp and thin, you can use just to open up your wires. This kind of really, another great tip, gives you a head start to be able to turn your wires in so that you can lock in that cabochon. So I'm going to get up underneath there. Let's use my fingernail first. Well, that's not working either. There we go. There we go. Now I can go ahead and just open that up. And if your wires move on the bottom, don't worry, you can just slide them very gently over. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and preset the back. I'm going to use some very tiny tipped round nose. I don't want to use them. These are my favorite. I've had them since I was probably, I played around with jewelry just a little bit when I was in my 20s. So I'm going to preset the back. So I'm going to turn this in. And I'm actually coming up a little bit. I don't want to start down where my half round is because I need to really lock in that back. So I'm just going to come up a little bit. And I'm holding both of these wires firmly because I don't want to pull this wire way away from itself. And I'm just going to bend and turn it in. I'm going to start off slow. And same thing over here. Hopefully I have the same distance, bend, and again I'm holding these two wires together and turn it in. So we got a little bit more of a crimp on this one than we do the other one. So let's just turn that in a little bit more and we'll straighten that out. Just want to get my stone set in the back. Now, some of you that wrap stones all the time are probably going to wonder, why is she only using 2 wires? And you'll see, because I don't want a ton of wire for this cab. Although it's pretty thick walls, it's just telling me how far I want to pull this up over this stone. There we go. I just felt it snap in. All I'm doing at this point is I'm stretching this wire that's going to go over the front of the cab towards the front of the cab. So I'm working on the back, and I'm going to clean up that back. I'm actually going to pull these together a little bit. Really want to capture that stone, but we're going to be covering the back again with additional wires. So that's why I am using only 2 wires. I'm going to tuck that in a little bit more. And I'm going to push my stone down. Pushing my wire against my board to get that stone nice and flush. Now I'm using my fingernail again. And there's many different techniques. You know, no man, there's a saying, is an island. So I'm a firm believer when people get upset, oh, she stole my design. Believe you me, we have all learned from each other and are continuing to learn from each other. I don't really watch tutorials much anymore. If I do look at anything, I follow some of the most advanced artists in the world, and I'm looking for technique. That's the big key in this business. Woo, I grabbed the wrong ones there. Big key is technique. How did they do that? Not so much, I want to make that pretty wrapped. How did they get the wire to do that? Okay. Just cleaning up this back and pushing it up against my stone. So now my stone is really in there good, but I'm going to go ahead and close off this front. So I'm bringing my wire over my stone again. I'm really just massaging it and pushing it forward with my nail. Don't want to use a tool at this point because I don't want to put any bend in my wire yet. Okay. Now I'm going to come in off the bottom. And those are not my favorite. I'm looking for there we go. Got tools going everywhere. So now I'm going to just simply come off the bottom here, and I'm going to lift up on that wire, and from an angle, I'm going to come very close to my half round on the bottom, and I'm just going to crimp it up. So again, I'm holding it on the top, and I'm pushing that wire up so to capture the stone. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. I need to get in a better working position. I'm going to hold my wire and push it up. It's really tight, which is good. I want it really tight. So you just got to get a little female power in there, or man power if you're a guy doing this. So now I have captured my stone. Want a little bit more of a curve or a bend on that edge. Much better, much happier with that. So now my stone is really captured. It's in there super tight. If you feel like, you know, your stone is vulnerable, it shouldn't be loose. You shouldn't be able to feel any movement. You can always come up to the top, pull your wire up towards the top to capture your stone even more. So I'm just pulling it up towards the top, pushing it away from me. And I'm not really squeezing on my wires, if you notice. I'm letting the pliers push that wire for me. And I'm just going to keep pushing it up. So this way you feel secure, that your stone is secure. So now we have this beautifully wrapped cabochon. Now we're going to set this aside. I am just pulling my wires closer together and opening them up. So here's the trick on creating this frame. You got to create the frame so that the stone can fit in it, and at the same time, you want to make sure that you have enough room to work your wires, because this is where we're going to attach. So we're now going to make the bow tie frame, and I know now how much do I got going on here. I'm going to want something, and I'm going to need it teardrop shape. This one's more of kind of a round shape. I know now that I want about, I'm going to say for me, based on the width of my stone, let me show you what I'm thinking. I need that gap space, and I like that open space there for this design. So I'm going to do about 13, 14 millimeters. And again, here's another trick. Let's see if we can use this. So to start my wrap, I'm going to obviously measure to see the width that I'm going to need, and I can always make it wider. So I'm going to use a ring dowel. I have 12 inches of 16 gauge, and I need to find my center, which is approximately right there. I'm going to start my bend and just bring my wires together. And notice I'm coming wide because I just want to bring them together so that I know where I'm going to start. Again, I'm using all of these little tips and tricks and techniques to my advantage to make my job a lot easier. So let's start with 6. It's not wide enough. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring these together, and I need a teardrop shape. And I've got my finger over that X, and instead of really tightening this up down here, I'm going to push it down towards the dowel. Just pushing that down towards the dowel. I'm going to pull it out. I know that this is too big, and that's okay. And I'm just going to start bringing them together. This is giving me an idea of how big I want my frame. So now I'm going to pick up my cabochon. Look how pretty that's going to look. And you can have it as big as you want. I mean, you can add all sorts of things inside of this frame. Beads, stones. And I'm going to bring mine down just a little bit more. And put this back in there. Sorry, you guys, if I was out of frame. Just want to see where I'm going. So I think I like that. So what I'm going to do is mark my wire. Put my cabochon inside my frame. Move these little guys out of my way. I'm going to push that down a little bit. And I think I like that. So let's just bring them in a little bit more. So the thing in wire art is a lot of, little movements and adjustments. We're constantly making adjustments. So if you're a beginner, take your time. It gets frustrating, but that's okay. That's the part of this beautiful ancient art. Now I'm looking at the way everything's setting up. I really like it. So I'm just marking this area because that's where I'm going to want to bend my wire. If you can see here, I'm going to create my little bows. So I'm going to create my bows here, and that's where I'm going to create my bows. So before I create my bows, I want to hammer my wire. You can hammer it afterwards too, but let me think. Do I want to hammer it first or after? I think I want to hammer it now. And the reason why I'm going to do this now is I want to make sure that my frame is really solid. It's not going to move when I create my bows. So I'm not going to hammer it on camera, so I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back, and I've hammered my wire, and I actually flared out the sides a little bit here. That's my dog, Sophie. She barks at everything. Not really, she's pretty good. Soph, baby girl. Be a good girl. Now I want to teach you another tip, trick, and technique. When you get dents, now I chose this as my back, so the dents are much stronger on the back because I chose this as my back, so I hammered the back side, not the front side. But when you get even little dents or little marks on your wire, I use sanding blocks, and these are actually by Wide Ear. They're 180 grit, so they're super soft, and they're wonderful for buffing out and polishing and shining up your wire. I have heavier grits as well when I really need to get nicks out, because we all nick our wire. I don't care who you are. Not as you advance, you're not going to have really big nicks like I did in the beginning. But anyways, it really just beautifully polishes your wire. And I always do front and back, and it gives it a nice, soft, satiny brush look. And it's just wonderful. I use it for everything. So now I'm going to do my back as well, because I don't want to see that. And I want my work to look clean and professional. And if you are going to market, here's another tip. You really want to make sure that you use stronger gauge wires for particular pieces, and so that they hold up. When I first started out, I actually started out on 18 gauge, and it was a nightmare because it was the hardest wire to learn how to work in the beginning. Now I'm working with 12, 10 gauge wires. I've really stepped up to the thicker gauged wires because I want my designs to hold up. So you might want to give that consideration when you're making something. Will this hold up? You don't want people coming back and saying it bent. Now, wire will bend if you drop it, you know, or throw it in a jewelry box. I always tell people to keep their wire art, consider it like an heirloom, and keep it separate from other jewelry. Your necklaces, please hang. Your bracelets, either put them in a box. But I think that care instructions are critical that I include in all of my pieces when I sell them. So here we go. So we have this beautiful frame. And now I'm going to put this in here. I'm checking her out. She's looking good. I've got beautiful space to work with. Look how pretty that's going to look, right? So now we're going to make our bow. And making the bow is simply, we're going to be rounding this and rounding the other wire. So we're kind of creating a figure eight. And I would recommend using a tool, and you can determine how big you want your bow. So I'm going to be using a 6-step plier, and I think I want my bow a little smaller on this one. So what did I use on this? Looks like when I could get in here, I used the biggest step. I'm going to use this step down, no pun intended, and I'm simply going to put my pliers inside of this cross, okay? And I'm going to slide them up a little bit. I don't want to start right here because I don't want my bow to come down on my frame. So I'm going to come up about, and if you're using calipers, I'm going to come up about 3 to 4 millimeters. So I'm going to put my pliers back in here. You can see the gap space that I have. Now, you could measure, you could mark. So if you're a beginner, don't be afraid to mark so that they're even on both sides. And I'm going to bring my wire around and under because I want that wire to come up so that I can create my bail. So this wire is going around and it's going underneath and coming up. And the same thing with this one. It's going to go around and underneath and coming up. So our wires come back together as 2 straight wires. So I'm going to go ahead and I actually need to turn this around. So I'm coming around the back. Always find your best working position. So I've got about a 3 to 4 millimeter gap space, and I'm simply going to grab my wire way out here, and I'm going to use the wire as my anchor and swing it around. Okay. And then I'm going to start to bring it up. Now I'm going to readjust my fingers, my hand, and I'm going to turn that wire up. And I'm going to stop right there because now I got to turn around and see how far my bow is away from my frame. So now I'm going to come back in and I'm on the front of my frame now, and I'm turning that wire into itself. And it's a little round for me, but I'm going to show you how to tweak that a little bit and give it more of an oval shape. So I'm going to come back in again and really turn that wire right into that frame. Okay, so there's one. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and I am going to put my pliers in, get my gap space, and bring this wire around, letting my wire work for me. And I'm going to turn this around and bring it up. Then I'm going to start to rotate that wire in. And what we're getting here now is we're setting ourselves up for our bail. So let's go ahead and turn around to our front. Now we're going to make our adjustments. This side's a little high, so all I'm going to do is just tweak it in. Okay. So now we have our bow. So I'm going to go ahead and set this in there. Perfect. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of flatten these down a little bit. First, I want to make sure that they're level. Bring that down a little bit. Bring my wires back in. So now I'm going to get myself some big pliers. And you can use big flat nose, or I like these. These are called duckbill pliers, and I tell you, your tools are everything. You don't have to have super expensive tools. You just know that certain tools will do certain things. I don't use these a lot, but when I need them, they're super handy. All I'm doing is just making some adjustments here. I want to make sure everything's centered. Now I'm going to come on top of the middle. Okay, here's the middle. Here's the middle. And I'm just going to gently and hold very tight. I do not want to move my frame wire. So I'm pressing super tight in the middle, and I'm just going to squeeze this. Really want to hold those wires tight. Squeeze it together just a little bit. And see how I kind of created less of a round circle and more of a bend. And I'm going to do the same thing on this one, holding it really tight and creating more of that bend. I'm getting more of I don't know what you would call it, but I'm changing the shape. I want to bring this one down a little bit. Just a little bit. There we go. So I'm going to do this side again, I think. Hold these wires together. I want to really hold those wires together. Let's see what we got going here. This one I want it to go up a little bit. Just little tweaks. Okay, so now we got our bow tie. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hammer these sides, okay? And then we're going to set our stone. So I'm going to hammer these sides. And I'll be right back. So I've hammered my sides. And I used my buffing block to sand it out. And now we're going to go ahead and temporarily tie our bail together just so that we don't have any movement. I'm going to use some scrap wire. Let's see where I've got going here. So I'm just going to grab these because I don't want things to move around. And I'm just going to take this piece of scrap wire. It's 26 gauge, and I'm just going to tie these together. That's all I'm going to do, okay? So let's go ahead and set our stone. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to wrap our wires on our cabochon. We're going to take these wires here and we're going to push them through the open bow and we're going to wrap them on our stone. Now the best way to do this so that everything's nice and even is to mark. So you want to mark and set yourself up first for your bends. So I'm going to open these up a little bit, pulling the back one out first, okay? I'm going to pull that back one out first. I want to fan that out a little bit. Okay. And I need to see where I'm going to set my wires. So I know that I want my cabochon, let me get my hand out of the way, and you see why we needed that gap space in the frame? To sit semi-close to the bottom. It doesn't have to be exactly on the bottom, so that I can see where I need to make the bend in my wire. So here's another tip, and it really helps you guys. If you mark your wire and pre-start your bend, you will make your life so much easier. So I'm going to bend my wires above the starting of the bow wire. Not directly, I'm not marking them right where the bow wire is. I'm marking above them because you're going to lose space when you bend. So you always want to come above where you initially think you want your wire to rest. So by doing that, it helps me. These are just really great tips. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-start my bend. And I'm going to bend both these wires simultaneously. And I'm coming above my mark. And I actually want to use I need a thinner plier. I don't want anything to create a lot of so to make my life easy, instead of bending this way and maybe distorting my wire, I'm going to come right at that mark and I'm going to bend these wires with my other hand down. So this is a really cool tip so that you're keeping the integrity and shape of the wire up here. You're not tweaking that. And I'm going to bend that down. And I'm going to do the same thing over here on this side. I'm just going to use my finger and bend that down. So you should have, and I'm not doing super sharp bend, just enough to get myself started. So you should have something like that. Okay? So now I'm going to slip, see what I mean by making your life easier? I'm going to slip my wires through the bow. So this is what we should have. Okay, so now here comes the tricky part. It's just a little fiddly. You want to start pulling your wires down a little bit over that bow. Just gently pushing it over the bow, the frame of the bow. So that's the tricky part. So here's what we've got so far. Isn't that cute? Now you could weave around this. You could add extra wires if you wanted and really make this so elaborate. I mean, the sky's the limit. You could add beads to this. I would add them after you wrap your stone. So now I'm going to turn this over, and you can tape this if you're worried about keeping everything, you know, symmetrical. Now your wires are really long. And I'm thinking I probably, oops, I forgot to do something, you guys. I just realized. I'm going to do something a little bit different here on this one. I'm going to change this up a little bit because I realized something here. You know, that's the beauty of wire. And I'm going to wrap the outside wire. So I'm going to lift it up and I'm going to set myself up again. I'm creating a curve in this wire so that I can fold it in, okay? And I'm going to curve this wire inside the frame and push it out the other side. And I'm not going to tighten anything up yet because I need to make a lot of adjustments. So I'm just going to pull it out the other side. Now your wires will tend to get kinks and bends a lot, so you always want to straighten them out. I'm going to turn this around in my best working position because I want to make sure these guys are going to be center, and this is why I'm not tightening up my wire. I'm working away from myself now, creating a curve in my wire, and I'm going to bring it through the frame and push it through. Now things are going to be off center right now, and you're going to see that. That's why we don't tighten anything down. We want to move everything around. We want to be able to move and manipulate our wires. So this is what I'm doing here. I'm centering this piece up. I can see that I'm off center here. So I'm just pushing it over to where I want it to sit in the center of this frame, pushing that over. I'm going to pull this wire, this outside wire, down a little bit. I'm going to open it up a little bit because I can see that it's a little too tight, which is why we don't tighten our wires yet. These two are going to come down the back. I'm doing it a little bit different than I normally do, but that's okay. So I got to look at my center here. Want to make sure. Start pulling that wire in, pulling that wire. I'm working on my back now. And I'm going to crisscross these. So that you can see over my cab. So this is the tricky part, and this is why I said this is more of an intermediate tutorial. I think it would be very hard if you're just starting. I kind of want to push this guy up a little bit more. This guy over a little bit more. There we go. Lots of adjustment. Now I'm just going to pull this down. So this is my outside wire, and I used my pliers to pull it down. And I'm going to do this one as well. Got to make sure I'm keeping center here. Not liking that the way it's sitting. So I need to move this over this way. So because I can see that my wire wants to pull the cabochon a certain way, I'm going to work on the side that wants to do that first. So I'm just going to put that wire in there, and I'm going to start to, I need to correct my, now square wire has 4 edges or 4 sides. I want to make sure that the flat side, so if you notice I kind of twisted my wire back into that position, that the flat side, I'm holding this very firmly, I'm finding my center. This is where all the tweaking comes in. This is the fiddly part. I want to make sure I'm working on the flat side of my wire here. And I want to wrap that around and pull these up a little bit. Okay, it turned, so I'm going to turn it back. All right, let's see what we got going on here. And I'm not tightening them down super duper yet. See how it's kind of going cockeyed there? That I need to correct over. By moving this, it tells me where I need to correct my wire. Notice as I move this to center, these are really great tips, you guys. So I'm moving this cabochon to center, and I can see that the wire is raising up here in that bow. So this is the one that I need to adjust. So I'm going to put my hand here on center, and I'm going to come from behind and roll that wire down a little bit more to get to my center. That's a little bit better. So a lot of tweaking in this ancient art. Okay. Let's push you up. I'm just going to grab my whole stone, and I'm going to turn it in the direction that I want it to go. So it looks like I still got a lot of gap space on this outside wire here. So let me get these pliers. I'm going to open that up just to give myself working room, and I'm going to pull it around again. And I could really feel it center up. And don't worry about if it's pushing through. We're just going to push that back up. So this is the most tedious part of setting this stone. Now I'm going to come behind, let me use my finger, and push my cabochon up through the stone. Bring that down. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and tighten that up a little bit, just fairly gentle movements. And I offset it again. So let's hold this. I am just struggling with this. I didn't do it the first time, but oh well. Just part of it. Okay. Sorry about the arm there. I am grabbing my nylon jaw pliers and I'm straightening this wire out. And I'm going to do the same thing to this side. Just want nice, clean wire to work with. So now I'm going to tuck this wire in again. And I'm creating a curve. I'm setting myself up so my wire has memory and it knows where I want it to go. And I'm going to use my pliers to push that wire through and straighten it out in the back as I'm coming around. I'm going to make a curve on this one. so that I can push that wire through. I know my hands are in the way a lot, you guys. And I'm going to use my pliers to my advantage to get that wire to come through. You want to stop and straighten as you go so that you don't end up with these constant spiral curls. So let's turn her around. Need to see what's going on the front end. So now I'm going to bring this wire around. And this one. Getting in a better working position. This is the hardest part of this wrap, is getting that all centered. And I want my wire to be on the flat side. And that's a thing for beginners working with square. It's the best wire to work with because it really supports your stones without sliding. Round wire will slide a lot, but it's hard as you're starting out to keep your square wire on the flat side. So I'm just doing a little anchoring. I'm swinging that wire back and forth because I want it to tighten up on my frame. And then I'm going to bring these down towards each other so that they're closer together. Now you can do as many wraps as you want here. Don't worry if it's off center. I'm gonna fix that. All right. So isn't that cool, you guys? This is the hardest and longest part, as I mentioned. So I'm not sure, because I'm always changing things up as I go, if I want to cut this off now or continue with my wraps. On this one, I did 4 wraps. So I'm thinking I might do that same thing. I'm just thinking about it. Just really cleaning up that wire. Now, here's another tip. Remember I talked to you about the sanding block? This is your opportunity before you close off your wires, that if you have any slight little nickies, I noticed in this one I've just got a little bit, and that's because this is very soft wire. This is 21 gauge. So I noticed I've got a little nicky here. Let me get this to be more flat. So I'm going to roll it towards me. I really want it on its flat side. So this is where I'm going to get my buffer, and I'm going to buff back and forth on top of that wire and just take out those little tiny hairlines on there I didn't like. And I'm going to do the same thing here. So we're getting pretty center here, folks. You see why we did a lot of tweaking? Okay. So let's bring this around again, keeping it on the flat side. And I have a lot of wire here, so I'm thinking I might cut it, but I'm also always thinking about changing up my designs. So I tend to hate to do that until I really know what it is that I want to do. So I am going to curve this wire again. Give myself a really good working advantage and push my wire through, trying to keep the flat side going. Straighten it out. Straighten that wire out, and then I'm going to start anchoring that wire, pulling on it so that it starts snugging around the frame. Okay, let's turn it around, and we're going to go ahead and tighten this. So we've got those. Now I'm going to bring this down, and I'm pulling away from these two. I don't want to keep them in row or in line. I kind of want a little gap space there just for a different look. So I'm pulling it down and away. So let's go ahead and do this side. I'm going to create my C curve to roll my wire in, and I can see that it's twisting, so I want to keep that flat side going. So I'm just setting myself up. So let's get this going through. Want to keep these two together. And you do whatever works for you. You know yourself what's your best working position. So I'm just cleaning up my wire and then lining them up. I do one side at a time. I never complete a total side unless it's something I'm weaving, but in general, I do one side at a time. And I just noticed that my half round moved. So I'm just going to roll it in and down. And that's from all the movement that we're doing. This is going to be so cool. So I'm on my flat side. You can see I have the flat side there versus the edge. Just want to keep her on the flat side. And now I'm going to swing it towards the back. And I need to tighten this one up. See how there's that gap right there? So I'm just going to tighten her up around the frame. There we go. And let's make our curve again. This time I'm going to use my pliers to push that wire through and keep it on the flat side. Straighten it out. Not going to tighten it yet, but I'm going to anchor down a little bit. And same thing here. Create my curve. And keep that flat side going. I'm going to use my pliers. Notice how I'm working on the flat side. That way I don't want it to twist, because square wire likes to twist. Straighten it out. And anchor. Okay, so let's pull it around to the front and see what we got going here. I'm going to swing that down a little bit, and I'm going to swing this because I want the gap between these coils that I'm making. So I'm going to clean my wire up again. For me, everybody's different, but for me, working with clean wire all the time makes my life so much easier. And I'm just going to pull that around. Then trying to deal with a bunch of twisted, kinked wire. You can't go back in later in general. Sometimes you can. Just tightening that up around there. So now I'm going to bring these down together before I close them off. Okay, let's get in there on this baby. Now you could keep going down. I'm not going to. I'm going to go ahead and you could do all sorts of designs with this wire. You could make swirls. You could wrap it around and make beautiful swirls and really change the frame. But we're going to stay with the initial idea. So I'm pushing my wire up against the frame. And here's a really cool tip. In order to tuck your wire, a lot of times that's a really hard thing to learn, and measurements are hard in the beginning. So what I'm going to do is I'm looking at the space that I have here, and I'm going to cut my wire longer than I think, because I'm going to pre-start my bend to tuck it. So I'm giving myself about two millimeters. So I'm going to cut my wire longer than I think, because I won't need that much. So that's what I've done. And I'm going to bring this one over, and I need to tighten this. I can see that there's a little bit of a gap in there. And I'm going to push it down. These are really great tips, you guys, that will help you a lot. And again, I'm going to cut my wire longer than I think. So this is what I got. I'm going to turn it around and make sure these guys are looking the same, because I am one picky girl. I need to bring these two together more. There we go. And now I'm going to preset my bend. So I'm going to take my pliers, my needle nose, and I'm going to start turning it in. See how I'm presetting my bend? It's just going to make it so much easier for you to tuck that wire. And I don't want it too far into the frame. I just want enough of an edge to sit right on the inside. You could leave it on the top too, if you wanted. And I'm kind of going to do that anyways, so that I know where to cut. So I'm just rolling those down. They're too long now. And now I'm going to cut very close to the frame. And do the same thing on this side. I'm going to cut very close to that frame, always turning my designs around in the best working position. And so this is what you should have. So now I'm going to use, speaking of tools again, these are stub nose, flat nose pliers. They're by Xuron. They're phenomenal for working with little tiny pieces of wire that you need to tuck or tighten around a core wire. They will dig in your wire like no tomorrow. So you're not going to be using these for your normal bending and manipulation. But they're super great because the shorter the distance between the tip of your jaw and where it starts at its base, far more control you have with your wire. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come like this over the wire, and I'm coming off that tip. I'm going to use the tip of this to sit on the tip of that wire where I cut it. And I'm going to roll and tuck. And a very gentle, very, very gentle push, because these are super strong. And I'm going to turn around, and actually that's a little too close for me. And it's fine, you guys, the way it is. I'm going to lift that up. And I'm just going to cut that little tiny, tiny edge off. Perfect. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come behind it and roll it in. Much better. I'm not seeing that wire at all. Now I can tell on this one I need to cut it because I could see it from the other side. So I'm just going to take that little tiny tip off. I really don't want to see that wire coming out the other side as much as possible. And again, I'm going to come off that tip and I'm rolling my wrist into my frame. So looks like that one is still a wee bit long. I may be able to trim it from in here. Did I? Nope, I got to come around the back. There we go. Much better, much, much better. So you see how they're almost hidden. So now I'm just going to do some cleanup, make sure everything's lined up the way I want it, and we're going to continue. Like I said, you guys, this is the longest part, all this tweaking. So now I'm going to start to make sure that my stone is centered, and that's just simple moving it around. Looks really good to me. I'm going to bring these wires here together, but I'm going to weave them so that I have extra support on the back so that this stone doesn't move in and out, because right now it's flexible. So I'm going to weave in between this X here, and I'm going to push my stone up even a little bit more. Hold your neck very firmly and just grab the base of it and just pull it up very gently. Okay, so now I'm going to get myself some weaving wire. And I'm going to use a 28 gauge. I don't need, well, that's 26. I don't need a lot of strength, and I'm going to stay on my spool. So let's get this mess out of the way. Okay. And for those of you that have been following me, even though I haven't been around for 3 months, you know that I take my time a lot. I don't do fast 20-minute videos. I'm going to do 3 wraps, bring this together, and slide my wire up. My videos tend to be a lot longer because of all the detail and tips and tricks and techniques that I like to teach. And I really like to help beginners because I remember how frustrated I was when I started. So let me get that little buddy out of the way. And you can do any weave pattern you want here. I'm going to do a figure 8, and I'm going to do 3 complete rotations per wire. And then I'm going to come back through. So it looks like I got 4 on that one, which is fine. So here's our 3rd complete. So as we're coming around the top, it looks like a 4th wire. And I'm holding this pretty firmly. I don't want my wires to shift on me a lot, and I want to keep center. So there's 1, 2, 3 full rotations, and I'm coming back over and under. And let's do it again. That's 1, 2, 3 full rotations, and I'm coming under and over. So we're going to do 1, 2, and coming under. I'm going to push that wire up. I got tape on my finger. It's getting in my way. Okay, now I'm going to cut my wire, and let's make sure these are snugged up. And I'm going to leave myself a pretty substantial tail, and the reason is to really support this stone. I'm going to tuck the wire underneath the core wire here on the base of this stone, on the back of the stone. So I'm going to give myself, probably won't need it, but I'm going to give myself about 10 inches. Less is not more unless you're working with sterling. That's the only I can tell you. Definitely not more. Let me just tape this down. Okay, so now I'm going to let me come out of this, by the way. I didn't want to do my full 3. So I'm going to unravel until I'm down to 1. And then I'm going to come up underneath this wire. And if it's super tight, you can lift your wire up. Mine is. So all I'm going to do is just very gently lift the wire up. And if you can see up close, I created an itty bitty gap right there. Just enough of one to get my wire underneath it. So I'm going to get my wire underneath there. You might have to make a better curve in it. Here's another tip. You curve that wire when you're trying to get into tight spaces. You should be able to tuck it under. Oh, this is the frustrating part. There we go. Well, had it and then lost it. It happens. Okay. Just want to make sure everything's connected and strong. Now I don't want it down there, so I'm going to slide her up and pull her through. There we go. Perfect. Now I'm just going to slide it up a little bit. And I'm going to feed it through again. Holding my stone super firm. I don't want anything to get out of place. And then I'm going to bring it through this wire. And I'm going to do it. I'm going to go over it. So I came out underneath this wire here. And I went underneath the top wire. And now I'm going to come under. And I might have to move that wire up. I can see it snuggling through there a little bit. Oops. Okay. Sometimes our ends get a little too tweaked, so we just need to cut the tip off again to make our lives much easier. There we go. What a difference than trying to get a crimped, kinked up end of wire through there. So I'm pulling it through and sliding her up, and I'm going to come around and I'm going to feed it through one more time. So now what we've done is we've encased our frame, this frame, into the frame. So we've locked it in to the cabochon. So now what I'm going to do is just with the back of my plier, the rubber part, just pushing that into the base of my stone again. So here's what you should have so far. And I can see I moved my wires around a little bit on the back of my cabochon. It happens. I'm going to trim this guy. And here's another cool tip. When you have a wire in between two wires really tightly, just pull that wire away so you can get really down in there super close. And if you can, very gently push it down. So now we're going to continue doing some weaving. Not a whole lot, because I think we have plenty of support. And we're going to come under. This time I'm only doing 2 full rotations, so I'm coming over and under on the third. So as I'm coming around on top with my third, I'm coming under and over. Now I'm going to slide these up. And I'm thinking that might be good enough. Let's just use up this wire, shall we? Okay. I think that's good. So let's turn around and see if we did any weird tweaking here. We didn't. I'm going to push those up. I really don't want them to show too much in the front. I'm going to take that side out and leave it tied off on the other side. For some reason this one is showing up over there. So here's what we should have. We're coming along, you guys. I know we're an hour and 15 minutes into this, but hey, that's what it takes. You know, 3.5 years ago when I started, this would have taken me all day. So there's something to be said for this progression that you will absolutely experience as you evolve. I am going to take that off and I'm going to leave it tied here. Yeah, and I'm just going to come under it and cut it off. Okay, now we're going to center up. So we want our wires to bend over this frame. Look how cool that is. You could put beads in here, you guys. There's just so many different ways that you could elaborate on this design. I'm telling you, you could weave in stones, which I might do later. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set myself up. I want to make sure that my wires are center, and I'm just even these up so that I have equal length. And I'm going to preset my wire. So I'm going to work with the square, hold very firmly, and push it around the stone. And the same thing here. Make sure it's on the flat side. I'm going to tweak this a little bit because I know what it's going to want to do. And I'm going to push this flat around my stone. And I want to make sure this needs to turn in towards the base. Okay. Always turn your work around as much as possible to make sure everything's balanced and you have symmetry. Turn that in a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing. We preset our stone. We're telling it, not our stone, our wire. We're telling it where we want it to go. We've made our bend. And now we're going to tuck it through. And see how that bend is already there? So we have memory in this wire. I'm going to straighten that out. And I'm not going to go super tight. Remember, as I started out, I said I never tighten down until I've done both sides and they're equal. So we're going to do the same thing here. Create our curve. And I'm kind of curving my wire towards the bottom. I don't want to curve it up this way because I'm tucking it in down here. And I can see that it's wanting to twist on me. So let me correct that. There we go. Push that through. Holding very firmly, everything very, very firmly. Okay, so this is where we're going to make our adjustments. Doing a little anchoring, but not super, super tight. I haven't closed anything off yet. So here's what we should have. I need different pliers. I don't want to use those. Sometimes too thin or needle nose tip is not the plier you need to do certain things. It'll actually get in your way than help you. Need to straighten this out. So what I'm going to do is pull these two closer together in the back. And I'm going to do the same thing here before I finish off coiling these off. I want to make sure they're super even. This one I need to turn up a bit. Very, very, very slowly and gently. God, you guys, I hope I wasn't out of frame. I'm just tightening this up. Okay. So, all right. So at this point, again, you could make little swirls with your wires. Now you know why we used 8 inches of wire. And I can see that this is not staying on the flat side. So I am going to twist this and fold it over and bend it in. And we'll correct that in a minute. This is a little twisted too. It's too high around the back. So I'm going to fold this over. And I can see I need it to be on the flat side. Okay, so now I'm going to pull these together, push them through. You can do as many wraps as you want. It's up to you. Let's slide all these together. Let's see what we got going. Like that. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Just beautiful. And I love it with this teardrop cab. I may later put some beads in there. So I'm going to leave it with 2 wraps. You can do 3 wraps. You can do whatever you want. I don't know. Do I want to do 3? Yeah, I'll do 3. I've got the wire. Why not, right? Okay. Let's do 3. And remember to hold your frame really tight. You don't want to tweak things out of shape. What do they call it? Discombobulate. All right. Now I'm going to cut my wire. I'm just pulling it super tight. I'm going to push this wire back because I'm going to cut it on the inside of the frame. Inside down here. So super close, which is why I pushed my wire away from me so I could get really close. Then these wonderful stub nose. I don't want any pokies, don't want anything sharp. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to push this wire away from me so that I can get down really close. I want to make sure it's nice and tight against that frame. And if you push it away from you, as I mentioned earlier, you can get down in there really close so that you don't have this wire sticking up. And then I'm just going to tuck her in. So let's turn it around, make sure we've got symmetry everywhere. I'm going to get my buffing block. Just get out any tiny little hairline nicks. And now we're going to finish the bail. And this might be an hour and 45-minute tutorial, but it's intermediate, so it takes time. That's just so, so pretty. I love it. Love it. So let's take off our little temporary tag. And now we're going to make our bail. And you can use weaving wire. You can use half round wire. I think to change it up a little bit, I'm going to use, that really bugs me right there, the way that half round is sitting. Sorry, you guys, my brain just works that way. Okay, love it, love it. Gonna slide this down a little bit. Okay, better. Slide that up, this down. I like that little spread in between the wires. I think that's really pretty. So you have options here on your bail. You can keep it very basic and very simple. This one I'm going to do a little bit different. I'm going to open it up. And I'm looking at my bow up here, and I'm thinking I want it to be a little bit more tapered, very, very gently. I'm just going to squeeze in, which is going to open up that bail anyways, and squeeze in. Like that. This side's got to go down a little bit, which means my wires are too open on the top. I should have adjusted those first. So here's our bow tie. I'm going to be using a 26 gauge weaving wire. Won't be needing all of these huge tools. I'm going to be working off the spool. All right, so let's get going. So here's my 28. Any pattern you want. You know what? I'm going to use 26, you guys. Sorry, had to change my mind. I don't want 28 for this bail. And I have a reason for that. The reason why I don't want 28 is because that's 16 gauge wire. And for me, that's a very thick wire. I don't want the 28 to get lost in it. So I'm going to work off the spool. And I'm going to do 3 coils. I'm going to show you the pattern I'm going to do. You can do any one you want. Come way down to that bow. Now at this point, you could put in a bead, and I think I'm going to do it. But I'm going to wait until I do a couple of weaves. I'm going to teach you a trick, you guys. I know this is taking forever, but you'll love these techniques. Where did my needle nose go? Might have to work with other ones. There they are. This is a really cool trick. If you want your wire to be equal on each side, then you leave a tail. And I'm hoping that tail is long enough. And you wrap it the same on the other side so that you have equal amount of wraps to start with, versus always having one side with something and the other side not. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think you'll understand what I mean when as soon as I get this other 3 coil wrap in. I want them to be equal so that there's symmetry. And that was like the perfect amount of a tail. Lucky me. So now it's like perfectly symmetrical, and you have the same amount of wires on each side, versus when we start weaving, we always have a starting weave and then it's never the same on the other side. And that really bugs me sometimes, so it bugged me on this. So now I'm going to add a bead. So I'm going to have to cut my wire. I can't work off this spool anymore. I'm going to be making a 1/2 inch bail. So here's another trick. In order to get a 1/2 inch bail, you need to weave 1 inch of wire, because you're going to bend at the 1/2 inch mark. So for those of you that don't know that, that's a really cool tip. I'm going to cut myself about 30 inches of wire. And I'm going to decide, can I bring in that 4mm, or do I need to use a 2mm? Let's see. I'm going to grab a bead and set it here and see if that will fit, or if it's just a little bit too big still. Actually, I think it'll fit fine. So I'm going to run my wire through my bead. I'm going to do just a couple of these, then the rest of the bell I'll work off camera once you know what the pattern is that I'm doing. I'm going to slide this all down and open this up to accommodate that bead. All right, cool, huh? So I'm going to do 3, that's 2, that's 3, and I'm coming around the back. Let's slide this side up a little bit. And I'm going to do 3 again. 1, 2, and on my 3rd, I'm going to come over the top and do coming around the back. Now on my third, instead of coming over the top, I'm going to grab another bead. And I think I just might want to do 2, I don't know. So here's what we got. So 1, there's my second, there's my third coming around the back, over the top, coming around the back, slide it down. Pretty cool, huh? Should I put a bigger bead in there, you guys? Do I want 3 big beads? Okay, lesson learned. Always close your beads. Don't leave them open around you. Let's see if I want to do a bigger bead there. That's kind of cool. I'm going to stop at 3, and then I will finish the bell off camera before I bend it over. So you guys know what I'm doing with the beads. I'll be right back. So I just wanted to pop back in. I know I said I was going to finish the bell, but I think this is important, especially again if you're a beginner trying to do all of this. I'd love to see what you did if you are. Please go to my facebook.com DDLynn Designs page and post there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring my frame in. So I have 1/2 inch here. I've measured this out, and that's just so cool, isn't it? And so I'm going to use my round nose pliers, and I'm going to bend this in. Before I begin my weaving again, I'm going to bend this in. And then I'm looking at how far down I need. I need a 1/2 inch more of room. So this is the 1 inch mark right here, and I've already got a 1/2 inch. So what I'm going to do, same thing I did before, I'm just going to run my fingers down, and I'm going to pull them together. And here's that tip again. Now this is 16 gauge wire, folks. So it's going to be a little bit different. You need to use not a super sharp plier. This has really soft edges, and you're just going to pinch like before the top. So now you've set yourself up perfectly to complete your bell, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I finished my bell. Now we're going to go ahead and create the bell. I'm going to close my bell off with a series of wraps. Then I'm going to come around one side 3 times. So this is my top. I'm really snugging that down. So now we're going to create our bell. Let's get all this honky-tonk out because we're not going to be using our beads anymore. And if you've ever knocked your bead jar over, you know what I'm talking about. No fun. Okay, so now here's another tip. Some people start right in the middle. It depends on how you want to stylize your bell. I'm going to pull these 2 wires down here towards me. I'm going to use my thumb right here, and I'm just going to bend them forward a little bit. That's what you should have. Again, it's all about making your life easier. You can use your finger. You can use bell making pliers. I'm going to use my finger. When I started out, I never did. And I'm going to come down right below where this pitch is in, where it's bent in. And I'm just going to start using my finger. I'm holding very, very firmly, and I'm just creating my bell. Very little slow steps. And I'm using my wires in the back now. And I've left my tail wire, which is about 15, 16 inches. And I'm going to push it because this is 18 gauge. It's a much harder wire. So I'm going to get my round nose, and I'm going to actually bend these up just a little bit right here at the feet. And as I'm bending it up, I'm pushing the bail into the frame. You want to make sure that you don't tweak anything like I just did. Little subtle tweak there, but nothing major. Okay, isn't that cool? And so now I'm going to push these down into the frame. Because it's 16 gauge wire, you don't necessarily, like I didn't here, you don't necessarily have to tie these off. I didn't tie this one off. That's up to you. I'm not going to tie them off. I may on the bow, I don't know, because I change as I go. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to weave. And I want to open these up. So I'm going to open them up. Make sure they're nice and pressed against my frame. And I'm going to continue with that figure 8. And I need to slide them down, especially when your wire's already bent and pitching. You're going to have to be mindful about not waiting to slide them down. Now I'm debating if I want to come off the bow or if I just want to cut them. You could actually drag these back wires here if you wanted through your bow and create more design elements or add to the bow. You could do so many things. This design that I came up with, the sky's the limit. I don't draw, so everything I do is just out of my own mind, just total artistic freedom. I wish I could draw because then I could remember how I make half my stuff, but a lot of times I can't remember how I made something unless I make it right away. So if I'm going to attach, I just don't think I need to. I'm just going to stop here. And I'm going to cut my wire. And I'm going to curl my ends. So I'm going to swing them out even more. Because I'm going to be curling them in, I need working room. So now I'm going to cut these. And I'm going to be using what's called super flush cutters. They're designed to cut very heavy wire. I used to do stained glass, so these are my stained glass cutters. And I'm just going to cut right here. I'm going to leave more than what I need. So that one's a little shorter, and that's probably about what I'm going to need now. Oh crap, sorry you guys, I just heard the trash company. I got to get my trash out. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to blunt these or soften the blunt ends with some more heavy duty round nose. And how I do that is I hold very firmly and I smash the tip. I just am not really fond of blunt ends in most work. So I'm just squeezing and rolling off that tip just to soften it. And you can leave it blunt. That's your call. Everybody has their own style. Just rolling off that tip. And I'm always going to do both sides, one side at a time. Sometimes it's really hard to get a grip, especially in the position that you're in. So I'm going to see if I can lift this up a little bit so I can get up underneath it. There we go. I'm starting to... Sorry, you guys, I was probably out of frame. Just want to soften that tip. That one I'm not liking so much, so I may use a file. 16 gauge is a tough wire to mess with. So I'm going to file off that tip. Here's another trick. When we do that, sometimes it gets a little too paper thin. So I just come in and file it off. And it softens it anyways. Do the same thing over here. It's a really sharp tip. And again, this is your time if you have any nicks. Now I'm going to pre-start my bend. So if you notice, I've curled these both in. And I'm going to pull this wire out again. And the reason why I'm pulling it out is because I'm going to be swinging that curl or that swirl or that loop, whatever you want to call it, I'm going to be swinging it in. So I'm going to pull this up and I'm going to snap my wire. I'm going to do a wiggle, jiggle, wiggle, and it snaps right off. And cinch that down. So, okay, this is your opportunity to get any nicks out. If you have any, I just do this by habit, whether I have them or not, especially when I'm working the wire really hard. And we're almost done. So I'm going to get my pliers. I'm going to come back off that tip a little bit. I'm not coming right on it. And I'm going to roll it in. I'm going to stop, and I'm going to do the other side. So they're constantly even. Now, I could actually leave that as a heart. That's kind of cute, huh? I think I will. So I'm going to bring in, I'm coming in the middle of that curve now and turning it in, and the middle of this curve and turning it in. Now I'm going to stop, and I think I'm going to leave that. I really like that. It does not need to be tied together. This is such a short piece of wire. You could solder that if you wanted. It's just such a short piece of wire. So there we have it. We've completed our beautiful bow tie wrap. This was our first one. Little chubby guy. I really love it with the teardrop labradorite. And I really hope you enjoyed that, you guys. I would love your comments, your feedback. Please like and subscribe. I will be doing new tutorials once a week now. I'm back in, so I'm ready to do it. I've got all my galleries set up, and I'm not doing shows because it's great being in a gallery. Just making some tweaks here because little things bug me. And so I'll have the time now to invest in providing you with tips, tricks, and techniques in this wonderful, fabulous, ancient art of wire. I wish